Yo, you're listening to Everyday Superpower, where we talk non-verbal communication, verbal communication, relations, game, everything in between. Yo, let's have a chin wag, yeah? Today we're gonna talk about patterns, character, pattern recognition. You might have to do a little insight as well in regards to your own patterns and your own negative traits and how you can't help but continue making the same bad decisions that only generate momentum and grow tenfold. So, you will know people, you will have grown up with people, you might be this person, and let's be real, you are this person in one way or another, as we all need balance. But you will see certain people who make bad decisions, and don't get me wrong, I guess it's in the eye of the beholder, but societally speaking, let's say an individual gets into debt, yeah? Or an individual is violent and has acted out of order, out of pocket in a violent manner, as to which has resulted in a negative circumstance for themselves. You know, I mean, there's nothing wrong with acting in whichever manner as long as the individual in question has done so with the correct calculation. But, and I'm just speaking on the game of life, legally speaking, you know, that's no comment from me, but you can identify people by and how much of a benefit, if not a detriment, they will be to you and your life and your space when you meet them, when you start to delve into the pattern and the experience that individual has had up until this point. And they can do the same to you, right? So one may call it being judgmental, but there's nothing wrong with being judgmental if it's a safety precaution to ensure you preserve your energy without having to run around in this negative space, taking on these negative frequencies and vibrations for nothing. So a person might be bad with money. Bad with money in a point where they get themselves into debt. They've been in debt before, right? So one is everything and zero is nothing from the get-go. So they might have fallen into debt one time. That's already a massive leap. That shows that they are capable of doing so. And don't get me wrong, I come from a background where people have near to nothing. So this is not only a common occurrence for me, but I'm not saying this to stand on a pedestal or be on a high horse, alright? So do yourself a favour if any of this relates to you and the people around you. But it is my philosophy and what I've observed. And unfortunately, I have had the misfortune of being around a lot of this myself, not being the person who has involved themselves into debt. I think me being around it as I was younger sort of triggered a shift in me to be the opposite, actually. One may consider me, somewhat frugal in spending. Okay, so some may see that as quite a character flaw, alright? So, there's highs and lows when it comes to it, but somebody who has been in debt once shows that they can get to that position. Somebody who has been violent once shows that they can be pushed into that position. Somebody who has, spent an entire day reading books on this or the other can show they can do that again, right? So, you can apply it in any sense, really. If they've done it before, they can do it again, most definitely. And if it's a negative trait, if it's a bad, detrimental outcome, unless it's been so shocking and traumatic to them as to where they want to avoid getting burnt to that extreme again, they're probably going to get there again, unless they push their perspective and their boundaries out further than where they were initially set, because obviously they were in quite a unsafe manner initially. So identify how the person has been before this. When you're engaging somebody with work, if somebody's just joined the workplace, or if you've just joined the workplace and you're sort of feeling out these people, or if you're in some sort of new group or situation where you need to make friends and or at least acquaintances and understand these people, find out what they do outside of work. Find out if there's any sort of negative issues that are looming upon them, and go from there. And if there's any sort of negative or contrary to your personal belief action that person sort of takes in, it can be applied across the board to their other actions, as everything is interlinked and interlocked. So I'm just going to randomly pull one out of the sky. Let's say somebody likes smoking weed, right? Yeah, now I'm not hating on you potheads, but somebody likes smoking weed. Outside of work, they smoke a lot of weed. So by default, in a judgmental manner, don't get me wrong, I can assume this person is escaping from something. So the person's an escape artist to some extent. And this applies to, you know, even celebrities. In my world, Snoop Dogg doesn't even get away from it. I see him as somebody who's obviously dealing with something and has to escape that through intoxicating himself as a means of, you know, suppressing and repressing what the conscious mind is creating. And by that, I can apply that to other addictive substances and apply it in the same sense, right? I mean, I know personally my limitations when it comes to substances, so by default I know very clearly I shouldn't touch anything else because it's not going to end in the right situation. I wouldn't be able to handle it personally. So that's a little bit of insight in regards to one of my negative character traits. It is what it is. It was my relationship with substance ever since I grew up. I never did things by half. So I know by default it's worthwhile not to touch anything or get involved with anything because it probably wouldn't stick in the right way. So by looking inside and internalizing that, I can look externally at other people and apply that math. Yeah, we are only human, and as complicated as we are in the grand scheme, in the long view of things, we can assess and understand outcomes and potential outcomes of a person's choices through what they've prioritized in the past and the actions they've taken in the past. Because if they've chosen to react in such a way to a certain stimuli, or if they've, chosen to take a particular path, it's shown that they've consciously taken so. For the most part, they've not been forced upon it. And if they have been forced upon it, how they've chosen to deal with it has been completely up to themselves. So there's a whole lot of understanding and observation to be taken into consideration when you are hearing somebody out. Yeah. If I meet a woman, and I'm knocking on a little bit, I've got children of my own, and I meet a woman who also has children, and she's got 3 children from 3 different people, if not just 2 different people, I would feel uncomfortable being the next individual purely due to the pattern that is emerging here. If it's one person, we can call that the off chance. If it's one person in her past, we could call it and consider it the, what would you call it? I don't know, just a single occasion, right? Whereas the second, they call that a coincidence. But the third, a pattern emerges, yeah? Which I'll speak of in another video as far as breaking patterns in order to shock and awe and create substance of value and emphasis on what you do, because the human isn't dumb. You know what I mean? Consciously speaking, we can be quite silly, but subconsciously speaking, we have a lot of deep depth of development and evolutionary hardwiring to really understand and survive. And we as humans are really good at observing pattern, and we find comfort in patterns. And as I just mentioned, 3 tends to enforce and emphasize the fact a pattern has emerged. So when you go from 2 to break, it becomes quite a shocking emphasis on that 3rd change, if you know where I'm coming from, as opposed to staying consistent. So that's it. That was just a little ramble today in regards to individuals' characters, observation, applying it tenfold across the board. Do they make bad decisions? We all do in one way or another, you know. It's through the eye of the beholder. So somebody could look at me and perceive what I'm doing as bad because they are more intelligent in a way. They have a more concentrated knowledge and apply their understanding, if not ignorantly, through an intelligent disagreement with the actions and the lifestyle and, you know, the choices I've made in the past. And that's no doubt. You know, if somebody has allowed themselves to be walked over in the past, so if a man is a little bit soft, now this is going to be quite close to home really, because I speak on Red Pill community here quite a lot, and you know, the men helping men sphere. When a man is hurt in his past and becomes a little bit of a doormat for other people, if not women, it still remains in their character. It still remains as to who they are, and behaviourally they still will sort of have that deep foundation of wiring. Everything additional to that is going to be like, you know, removing the topping off of a cake and replacing it with a new one. Aesthetically and overtly, you might find a difference once the man starts to go into the information, the books, and, you know, the content creators who tell him he has to work this way and that, and so on and so forth. But he has got this underlying wiring, and like I said, the entirety, the foundation of the cake still exists. The sponge still exists, and that sponge is full of the, you know, upbringing of the child, the trauma and development of years upon years upon years of the child, up until the day where they've come across this information and thought, right, I need to make a change. So it can then manifest in the opposite direction in overcompensating. Now, the point still stands. The person's still, you know, a soft ass, which isn't the worst thing in the world, you know what I mean? Everyone's different and everyone's got pros and cons dependent on the scenario and situation, but the person's still a soft ass, but now they're putting on this front in order to try and hide that and defend that. It still exists. Yeah, and you as a perceptive individual should be able to listen to a person's story, identify when they're fluffing it up a bit, over-accentuating the opposite of what they actually are, and then still work it out. All right, well, if you're saying that and that and that, that doesn't add up with that. There's a non-congruence with your body language and the words you're saying to me. So I feel a bit uncomfortable. My intuition is telling me that something's not right here. I know to trust my intuition. So I'm going to have a little bit of a dive into the information you're providing me here. You see? We're very complex and we communicate in very complex ways, but the more you listen, the more you learn, the more patterns you do find from person to person to person, which you can apply. And in doing so, you'll see it mirrored back in your own behaviour, your own discussions and communications and so forth. And that's a brilliant thing, because it's incredibly hard. To this day, and to the day I die, I will still be learning about myself, my connections with people and so forth. I mean, only as of recent, which I'll leave for another video, I've started to perceive and understand my relations with my parents in a way I never have done before. Because it's potentially the deepest connection you will ever make with another human, even if they were there or if they were not. We as an existing being that was created by two, we have a deep biological, animalistic connection to that. A chemistry with that, above and beyond any other person you'll meet on the street for the most part. So we'll leave that for another one. I'm signing out, people. Peace.